What's up, guys? Enkiri here, and welcome to the Hellacious Hamstring Havoc training vlog. Today's vlog highlights a recent hamstring-biased lower body training session of mine as part of the Enkiri Elite Conjugate method. If you're interested in training like me or learning the ins and outs of the conjugate principles that I use to guide my training, then be sure to grab a copy of my conjugate manual for yourself at www.enkirielitefitness.com. You can use code conjugate20 to get yourself a nice 20% discount off the manual. Please remember to like the video and leave me some love in the comments down below as well. So this session was a little bit different from my typical primary lower body training day, as I shifted the emphasis entirely onto the posterior chain and hamstrings in this session. Typically, I do some form of squatting in almost all of my lower body sessions, whether that's a heavy primary squat, a volume-based secondary squat, or some form of unilateral squat or lunge or something like that. There is almost always a squat. But my primary strength goal for the lower body right now is to deadlift 500 pounds with stiff legs from this 5.5-inch deficit. So with that, I've started to shift more and more of the lower body training emphasis onto the posterior chain in general. And if I keep doing vlogs like this, you will see more and more posterior chain based work coming up in those sessions. And I'm sure that some purist or some novice, which are basically the same thing, is going to jump in on one of these eventually and tell me that I'm rounding my back too much, or that I shouldn't be starting these from the top down, or some other silly thing. But you know what? I'm gonna do me. These stiff leg deadlifts are badass, and I'm already moving more weight than I honestly ever thought I'd be able to from this big of a freaking deficit with stiff legs. 500 pounds might be a little bit ambitious with this variation. I only weigh 170 pounds, but I'm gunning for it. I'm only doing these stiff leg deadlifts every few weeks right now, so I'm recovering pretty well each time, and I'm putting in really nice efforts each time that I do them, and I'm really enjoying the challenge so far. But yeah, so in this session, I got a really nice blend of first heavy hamstring work with the massive deficit stiff leg deadlifts, then some explosive hamstring work with the repeat short sprints. I followed that up with unilateral hamstrings for some rep work and a little bit of overload with the variation that I chose. We'll see that soon. And then I finished things up with some intense Nordic curls just for a little bit of knee flexion work for good measure. So a really nice blend of qualities, and really just kind of running the whole gamut here for the hamstrings. Just absolutely brutal and really, really productive stuff. Now for the short sprints here, I'm taking a 5-yard run up, and then I'm running a 10-yard fly as fast as possible. I did 10 reps in total, and you can see the times pop up on the screen with the skills timing system. Just a cheap little laser system that I picked up for fun because it's nice to have laser timing gates. I still mostly use Freelap as it's more reliable overall, but this one's fun to play with. These reps ended up being pretty solid though. Obviously, I already had a little bit of hamstring fatigue going into them from the deadlifts, but popping through a 10-yard fly in 1.09 in the middle of the street with just a 5-yard lead in is a pretty solid output, at least for me. Next up, it was one leg or unilateral hyperextensions, and these are just freaking brutal, man. The amount of tension that they put on that working hamstring is absolutely freaking intense. And I kind of want to make a dedicated video discussing this movement because I've learned some pretty cool stuff about it after a few exposures to it. But basically, it overloads the crap out of the working hamstring. I say this because when you do this movement, hyperextension, one of my favorite exercises, when you do it with one leg, you still get help from the erector muscles on the non-working side. But all of the tension is on that one working hamstring because the other leg is obviously not locked into the apparatus. So basically, you are able to overload the working hamstring because you're still essentially using 2/3 or maybe even 3/4 of the muscle that you have access to during the bilateral version of this exercise. But then one of the hamstrings is cut out entirely, so that particular onus falls entirely on the other hamstring, the one that is locked in and working. If any of that explanation makes sense, basically you're overloading the crap out of that working hamstring. Anyway, I basically had the goal here of working my way up to 140 pounds for hopefully something like 6 to 8 clean reps for a top set. The most that I had tried before this session was 130, so I wanted a small PR, and I got it with 140 pounds for 8 reps per leg. And this was the first time that this exercise actually got really, really tough for me. The last couple lockouts got pretty iffy, but this one just hits different, man. It's not going to turn you into a mammoth all on its own or anything like that, but as a secondary or tertiary strength and hypertrophy movement for the hamstrings, it is pretty fucking S tier. It would be cool to hit some nice work with 150 pounds on the unilateral hypers, but I don't think that I'm quite there just yet. Honestly, my biggest fear right now is just that I'm going to tear a hamstring on the way down. That is how intense that exercise is, but it's really, really good stuff. And then I wrapped up the session with some Nordic curls. So what I've been doing with these is essentially ramping up the intensity with each set by increasing the range of motion from set to set. So I start with an easy range of motion on set 1, and then I move into a more challenging range of motion on set 2, and then I finish up with either fully flat on the bench or just a very low incline on the final set to make it really challenging. So in this particular session, I started with 20 degrees on set 1, I went down to 15 degrees on set 2, and then I finished up with 8 degrees on set 3, which is the lowest setting on this bench, which is the Nordic back extension by the Tib Bar guide. That is the lowest setting that you can get, is 8 degrees before going fully flat. Most recently, I lowered each of these down 1 notch for each of my sets. So in that session, my most recent session, I did 15 degrees on set 1, 8 degrees on set 2, and then I did set 3, the final set, from a fully flat position. And obviously I lost some reps that way from set to set, but I was able to actually get 5 reps of full range of motion Nordic curls most recently, so that's pretty solid work. In this session, I got 8 reps from the 8-degree incline, which is pretty close to flat, but not quite flat. And what I think is a really important benefit of having access to a unit like this one that I have is just the ability to grade things like this. Obviously, if you aren't strong enough to go full range of motion at all, then you need to be able to regress this movement somehow in order to be able to bridge the gap. It's a really big gap that needs to be able to be bridged to do full Nordics, but we all kind of know that. But an underrated aspect of this bench is using it to ramp up the intensity intra-session like I'm doing here. That's a very underrated aspect. Nobody talks about it. But Nordics are super, super intense, and it can be very difficult to just jump right into doing them full bore on set 1. But by ramping up the intensity from set to set, you can actually get in much better work by the time that you get up to your most challenging sets, like me on set 3, where I'm using a flat position or a nearly flat position. So I've really been digging these lately. I'm making some really solid progress on them as well. Weighted glute ham raises is another one I've been doing. Between that and full range of motion Nordics, my hamstrings are going to be freaking popping. Anyway, that pretty much covers the session, guys. I hope you enjoyed the training vlog. Please remember to like and subscribe. Leave me a friendly comment down below, and check out EnkiriEliteFitness.com for online coaching and training programs. Keep training hard, and I will catch you guys next time.